that the key issue that we need to take into consideration is the ability of all the assessment components and all the education system components to interpret and implement the standards properly. And you may have a very good instrument that samples the items from the standards or translate the standards into specific items. They have a very nice approach to analyze the data. But if the teachers are not aware of the standards, then you're going to have a very complicated system, but it's not going to be necessarily educational goals. Ensuring that everybody is aware of the new standards and how they work, how they reflected, how they should be interpreted. That is the hardest part. The most difficult part is to make sure that all the teachers in the country know the standards very well. They know the structure, the goals, that they can tell you what is different now from where we were, let's say, 3 years ago or 5 years ago. So I think that the governments need to put a lot of attention, training teachers and providing professional development opportunities to make sure that all the teachers, even in those in the most remote areas in the country, know the standards, know the standards very well. What are the expectations? What are the ways in which different kinds of learning are expected to be promoted among students? So that is one part. And the other part is that we know from years of research in the field of teacher training and teacher education that the most experienced teachers are able to interpret information that they have in front of them and make sure and identify what they need to do to maximize the learning from in their students. I think that the pitfalls relying exclusively on large-scale assessments as a source of information. But there are so many things that could be done in addition. And one of them is, for example, collecting systematically information about the school's resources, cultural styles of the students, the characteristics of the teachers, to investigate how the standards and the socio-economic and cultural conditions match so that we can have a good way of interpreting when something is not supposed to be working the way that we would expect if we just rely on the standards. Another important aspect is if we have a mathematics assessment, let's say 4th grade mathematics assessment, we know that by definition, a test is a sample. It's just a sample of items of the whole universe of potential problem situations, questions, and so on that we could have in the corresponding content area. So what are other sources of information about mathematics proficiency that we should be collecting to properly interpret the results from the tests? There are many things that can be done formally or informally. So you can say these are low scores, but you can say also, well, at the same time, the test probably is overemphasizing, I don't know, recognition skills or computation skills, not much problem solving, not much critical thinking, not much evaluation or creativity. So let's keep our inferences from the student scores on the tests. Let's keep our inferences to make sure that our inferences on those scores are limited to those specific skills that the test is assessing. If we just use the score to say, oh, our kids in mathematics are not doing well, then we're not going to have much to say. There's another aspect of the pitfalls. In many cases, the results from large-scale assessments are used to punish or to promote or to reward school skills, not to make decisions about how to support the schools that are doing poorly. So we should have a very well-established set of policies. Okay, definitely, I mean, I believe there has to be some accountability. I understand that there has to be accountability, there has to be actions, there has to be always some ways of pushing everybody to be better every year. What are the ways in which we can interpret low performance in this area and in this area and in this topic and this topic in ways in which we can say, this is how we are going to support the schools. This is how we need to support the teachers. So that is another aspect that needs to be considered. We live in an era of accountability, and we live in an era of large-scale standardized testing. Students are tested very frequently during the school year, and that has brought as a consequence that the teachers do not feel that they own assessment as part of their teaching skills. This all started when I had conversations with colleagues and teachers, and I realized that many teachers, even if they had, let's say, 10 years teaching, have never developed their own assessment instruments or activities. What they would do is just to give their students the tests or the questions or the activities that were given to them by their school districts. I know how assessment can be a powerful opportunity to promote critical thinking. If you develop assessments, you push yourself to think about the underlying skills, the cognitive processes underlying problem solving, the nature of the knowledge, the epistemological aspects of problem solving, and so on. So if you have not exposed to that, you have missed a very important opportunity to think better about your students' learning. So I would say that it is important teachers to receive intensive support to develop assessment development and assessment use activities in their classroom. In many cases, teachers see assessment as an activity that is done by someone external, the person who comes to the classroom and tests your students. So I'm talking obviously about formative assessment or classroom-based assessment, but I'm not talking only about just writing my questions to give to my students. Of course, that is important, but also what are the kinds of questions that elicit thinking, that challenge the students, that promote critical thinking? Something that is very important. How can I know from the responses of a student in a test or in class, how can I infer the cognitive processes, their thinking, their learning, rather than, in addition to just saying this is incorrect or correct? When you ask those questions to most of the professionals, they are not used to thinking those ways. So it is important for them to establish that connection And this is something that has that is relevant to educators, school administrators, people who make decisions, because we are used to seeing assessment as something that is going to tell us that some measure is going to be low or high, but we are not used to thinking about assessment as a tool that is going to give us that we're going to be able to obtain information to make inferences about the students' cognitive processes. And that is an important aspect of training that needs to be taken into account. The US has many interesting experiences about developing standard-based assessments. So that is good to have as a model. But even when we follow models, we need to be critical about it. So excessively relying on only one source of information. Using information on test scores to make promotion or sanction decisions, and not having a well-established set of policies in terms of how schools are going to be supported, depending on their performance, on their students' performance in tests, and so on. So I would say pay attention to the standard documents that have been generated in the US. Pay attention to NAEP, to the design, to the structures, to how the United States have done it. But pay attention to all the literature generated in the US as well. That is from people who are so concerned about the social impact of all this accountability era. So how can we take the good experience and how can we make sure that we don't repeat the same sets of errors? I try to always talk about these issues, and because it is common for that I am asked, so how do you do it in the US? Well, yes, we do it this way, but you have to also take into consideration that it is not only how I do it, but also the legislation, the political pressures, the ways in which parents may interpret information, the way in which schools may misuse information, unintentionally, of course, and so on.